This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This Floss Weekly is with Ilan Rabinovitch, who started SCaLE, the Southern California Linux Expo, 20 years ago. This is the 20th one coming up. It's a big deal. There's so much he knows. There's so much experience he's got. There's so many things that he and Katherine Druckman and I talk about on this show. It's really good, and that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly episode 717, recorded Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. SCaLE is still huge. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by ACI Learning. Tech is one industry where opportunities outpace growth, especially in cybersecurity. 1/3 of information security jobs require a cybersecurity certification. To maintain your competitive edge across audit, IT, and cybersecurity readiness, visit go.acilearning.com/twit. And by FastMail. Reclaim your privacy, boost productivity, and make email yours with FastMail. Try it free for 30 days at fastmail.com/twit. FastMail is also giving TWiT listeners a 15% discount on the first year when you sign up today. Hello again, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good whenever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls, and this is Floss Weekly, and I am joined this week by Katherine Druckman. There she is. She should appear. There she appears in her nice office. I guess. She's like you have two locations. You just jump around in the house, right? Do you move the mic, or do you just have two mics?
I move the mic, and that is why I struggle a bit. Yeah.
I have my Rode mic, and I have my fixed mic. This is my fixed mic, which is in and it is a new location. You may notice that this is in Bloomington, Indiana. In my latest basement, I moved from another basement in Bloomington for earlier shows to this one, which is not furnished yet, except with some roll around organizing things that I picked up. One at a garage sale, the other at Home Goods. Home Goods is where stuff is the shortest distance between any retail and garage sales, I think, is Home Goods. but anyway, but they're handy. They're handy. So our guest today is Ilan Rabinovitch, and he started SCaLE, and you're going to SCaLE. So I think you're going to SCaLE. You're going to SCaLE?
I am going to SCaLE, finally, again. This year.
This is great. So, and an interesting thing to me is that I think my oldest emails from him are inviting me to come to SCaLE, which I have never done. And I feel guilty about that, mostly because I've always been elsewhere, even though I live there. So let's just jump into it and welcome Ilan to the show.
Thanks for, hey Doc, hey Katherine, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey. So you're no longer in Southern California, right? You're now been exiled to New York.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, SCaLE, for those of you that aren't familiar with SCaLE, it's a open source conference that's held in the Los Angeles area every year. A bunch of us started it when we were college kids. We wanted to see our favorite open source developers, and we thought if we start a conference, they'll have to show up. It's not as easy as that, but it did. It turns out if you invite somebody for 20 years, they might show up, or they might just always schedule. They might something, or like Doc, they'll always schedule a family reunion or something that same weekend in another state.
There's always something.
But yeah. So a lot of us have moved away from the LA area, though. Like we still have a core group of organizers in LA, but it turns out, when you don't always end up living where you were going to school, where we went to college, you end up moving around the world. And so we have folks coming in from Europe that are still core planners. They still love the show. They still want to be involved. Some of our organizers live in Canada, New York, NorCal, all over the place. And so, it's still a Southern California show, but a lot of our organizers have sort of spread around the world.
So what school were you going to when you started SCaLE?
I was a freshman at UCSB.
Oh, really? You're even farther out from LA than I was. Wow.
I mean, I grew up. So I grew up in Los Angeles proper, like San Fernando Valley, and then went to school at UCSB, and that's around the year. I think freshman year was the year we said, like, let's, a bunch of us at UCLA, UCSB, CSUN, a bunch of the local lugs are like, let's start a show, and that's where SCaLE came from. So, and 20 years later, I'm still doing it.
I love UCSB. I still have an affiliation there. I still have a fellowship with a center at UCSB, which I'm neglecting. I feel bad about it, but so I'd like to know kind of what is the arc. It's probably not an arc. It's more like an ascent of SCaLE over time. I've had a similar experience with IW up in Northern California, which started as a small thing and just got to be a bigger and bigger and bigger thing. Yeah. It seems to me SCaLE has just kind of steadily grown. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think that's true. We started, so before SCaLE, there was an event called the Lug Fests that ran in the LA area, and that was basically back in the day when Linux user groups were the way that you got really engaged with the open source community. We had, LA probably had something like 20 different Linux user groups, and LA is it's a very broad city. Going from point to point, it can take you forever, especially once you throw traffic in. So, on any given night of the week, there was probably a lug meeting, if not two. But different people went to different areas. We were all friends, but if you went to, I don't know, the LAX lug, you're not going to the Simi Conejo Valley lug or whatever it might be. And so for SCaLE, we wanted to, so we put together this Lug Fest, which is basically like our annual reunion or barbecue for all of the folks in the lug area. And we lost our venue for that. And so then SCaLE popped up. And I think the first SCaLE had maybe 200 attendees. We were at USC. It all fit in one room. It was it was a lot of fun, and everybody said, you'll be twice the size next year. And we actually turned out to be about twice the size the next year. So that's when we started adding this X piece after it. So it's like SCaLE 20. We're not actually, I don't know that we're 20 times the 200 we had back in 2001, but 2001, 2002. But yeah, it's just grown a little bit every year. And we've sort of followed the rise, I would say, of the open source and Linux, Linux world as a whole. As that grew, there's more interest, more people want to come out. We've also expanded our scope. So, we don't just cover Linux anymore. We have some of our members have gone, some of our organizing team have gone on to build great careers in the security space. And so security is really interesting to them. So they've created a bunch of tracks around security topics. There's other folks that are interested in DevOps or cloud or systems management or whatever it might be. And so we've expanded from, just a conference only about Linux, which is a small but very important portion of how we run all of our infrastructure today, to covering a whole bunch of other topics. So, I mean, this time the last couple of years, we've done free BSD trainings and workshops as well from the Free BSD Foundation as an example. That's not Linux, but it is still within I think our mission of teaching people about open source and about doing it in a way that's really accessible. So
I want to go back on the lugs for a second, because I hadn't thought about them, but they were a really big thing back in the 90s and the early aughts, and Santa Barbara had a lug. I went to that a few times, and they kind of, I don't know if they vanished, but they certainly went. They're kind of like, it's sort of like the same history as blogs had in a way. Blogs were huge. Yeah. My blog was huge at one time. I still have it. It's still around, and they're kind of like a corporate requirement, sort of. I mean, that's sort of the sad thing about it, is companies have blogs because they need a place to put their press releases. But what are lugs still a thing in some ways, or is it just an expired idea that was cool at the time? But I'm not sure.
I think there are lugs that are still around. The majority of the LA lugs are gone. If there's something around from them still, it's their mailing list and people's, or their IRC channels, or some other mechanism for maintaining the social connection. My sense is that lugs were a necessity at one point, because it was hard to find other people that were interested in open source and Linux. It was a necessity because it was hard to use open source and Linux. I remember failing many a times at my first Slackware install and having to, go out to the Simi Conejo Valley lug and get help from somebody to help figure out what was going on. And sometimes it wasn't your fault. Sometimes it was just we didn't support that graphics card or that chipset or whatever it might be. But I think as that became easier and as it just became the default that everybody around you is using Linux and open source software, getting together one day a month or one day a week to go talk about Linux specifically was like, well, I do that every day. And so what's left over is the social aspect. And so, a lot of my closest friends are people that I met at Linux user group meetings or Linux conferences over the years. But it's just not, I don't know. I think it's just a change in what we needed as a community. Meetups are still a thing, but they end up covering like a very specific topic on something that's hard today that maybe didn't exist when we had lugs. That's my take. It's not, but I'm curious what you all are seeing.
I haven't been to a user group meeting of any sort in so long. I have no idea what's out there. I used to organize a local Drupal user group meeting actually years ago. And that actually kind of leads me to what I wanted to ask you about. So 12 years ago now, I took the lead on organizing a Drupal event. I had a tiny bit of participation in the very earliest, I think, Texas Linux. Is it called Texas Linux Fest? Yeah. But the lead I took on the Drupal event. Events are a lot of work, tremendous amount of work, kind of mind-boggling if you've never done it. I wanted. How have you been doing it this long? What are your secrets? How do you manage your time? How do you balance everything? Balance to get this done. It's the 20th this year, right?
Yeah, 20 years. Yeah, it's I think 21 years since we started, but it's the 20th scale. We had to skip one in the middle because of it turns out getting 3,000 people together during a pandemic is usually frowned upon by city officials. But yeah, so in terms of that, I mean, I think one thing is I have a very understanding wife and I've always had very understanding employers. So I think that's the most important part is that I've had support in that way. They've always, whether it was Datadog most recently or Edmunds or Yala or any other places I've worked over the years, they've always seen this as they've always let me make my work on SCaLE be part of my day-to-day work at the company, which is great. The other thing is we have a large team. Like I wish I could say I'm on here on the show and you get to see my face and my bio, but the reality or hear my voice if you're listening to the podcast. But the reality is there's probably 100 people on any given year that are helping make SCaLE be what it is. And so like anything in the open source community, many hands make for light work. I think the biggest challenge I would say is like with any volunteer sort of community project is just it's a lot of herding of cats. And so people sign up to do something and they'll be able to put in they'll get to 20% of it and then work or life comes in the way and then you'll have to somebody else jumps in and does the next 20% and it continues from there. So but yeah, it's there's been years when it's tiring and there's some burnout and there's years but then SCaLE happens and we all just get re-energized by it. So this is around the time where a lot of my co-organizers will make fun of me because at we'll be talking about something and I'll say, well, if we do this again next year, and they're like, you've been saying if we do this again next year for 20 years, we're like, what makes you think? What makes you doubt it? And I'm like, I don't know. This is just the time of year when the tiredness sets in. But then we'll get together with 3,000 people or 4,000 people in a couple of weeks, and all the excitement will be back. So
yeah. It is great fun. I can't wait. I'm going this year. I actually, a sad story. I booked travel for March of 2020. I was planning to go to that one. I had been the previous. I was at 2019. In 2020, I had a sinus infection. I didn't actually have COVID, but it was at the very beginning. Right, it still happened in person. And I had to cancel because I'm like, I will get physically attacked if I get on a plane coughing the way that I am right now. So
I mean, SCaLE 2020 did happen. The interesting thing about that one was, you're calling all the health departments. We're like, is it okay to get together? Yeah. We hear there's a pandemic thing that might be happening. Nobody really knew what it was at the time. And they're like, it's just the flu. Don't worry. Put out some hand sanitizer. You'll be fine. And then literally as we finished doing setup the night before the conference, that was when the city of Pasadena and the city of LA said, state of emergency, it's a pandemic, don't go out. And we're like, we're already here. This is happening. It's too late.
Yeah.
So
I remember that. Yep.
And so it was a fun
there.
time, but a stressful one to say the least. That was probably my, when you run events for this long, there's always adventures. And I think this one, pandemic was one, obviously that was very stressful. The other one was the year we learned the Grammys were scheduled next door to us. And so you look around, they shut off all the streets, and you're like, nobody could get to the convention center. You have to get through the cops. There were snipers on the roofs of all the buildings around us. And so that was, I think I've told the story a few times recently, but one of our sponsors' materials disappeared, and they didn't we couldn't find it, and they were freaking out looking for the stuff for their booth. And one of our early co-founders, he's not with the show anymore, but Gareth had to with the convention center staff, break into the room where they had the actual Grammy envelopes with who or trophies or whatever with who won. And it turns out that sponsor's box was just sitting next to all of that, because that's what happens when you run events. And so they had sworn us to secrecy, but I figure, I don't know, 18 years later, I can, the NDA maybe has expired. So
Gareth, for those who don't know, was the last cover model on the last printed copy of Linux Journal. Little trivia for you.
Yeah.
Anyone didn't know that.
But yeah, so it's so for us, I mean, SCaLE really started off as a show for us to talk about, a way for us to put together an event that we enjoyed as a conference. And so that's still what we do today, is we just there's probably about 10, 15 core organizers that are doing things year round. There's probably 100 people once you start to include the people the day of the event. And all of us are just looking to put on an event that we enjoy and that gives back to the next generation of open source users and developers that we hope will get the same opportunities that we did. So yeah, that's.
Well, I want to ask more about the constituency of who's showing up and so forth. But first, I have to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by ACI Learning. For the last decade, our partners at IT Pro have brought you engaging and entertaining IT training to level up your career or organization. Now, IT Pro is a part of ACI Learning. With IT Pro, ACI Learning is expanding its reach and production capabilities, offering you the content and learning mode you need at any stage in your development. Whether you're at the very beginning of a career or looking to move up in your sector, ACI Learning is here to support your growth, not only in IT, but cybersecurity and audit readiness. One of the most widely recognized beginner certifications is the CompTIA A+ certification. CompTIA courses with IT Pro from ACI Learning make it easy to go from daydreaming about that career in IT to launching it. Earning certificates opens doors to most entry-level IT positions and supplies potential promotions for those already in the field. Tech is one industry where opportunities outpace growth, especially in cybersecurity. A recent LinkedIn study predicts IT jobs will be the most in-demand roles in 2023, so there's no time to waste. About 1/3 of information security jobs require a cybersecurity certification, compared to 23% of all IT jobs. While organizations are hungry for cybersecurity talent, the cyber skills gap grows bigger each day. The average salary for cybersecurity specialists is $116,000. ACI Learning's information security analyst and cybersecurity specialist programs can get you certified. In 2022, the global cybersecurity workforce gap increased by 26.2% compared to 2021. ACI Learning offers multiple cybersecurity training programs that can prepare you to enter or advance in this exciting industry. The most popular cybersecurity certifications offered are CISSP, EC Council, Certified Ethical Hacker, Certified Network Defender, Cybersecurity Audit School, and Cybersecurity Frameworks. Where and how you learn matters. ACI Learning offers fully customizable training for all types of learners, whether preferred in person, on demand, or remote. Take your learning beyond the classroom. Explore what ACI Learning offers with IT Pro, Audit Pro, including Enterprise Solutions webinars and the Skeptical Auditor podcast, practice labs, learning hubs, and their partnership program. Tech is one industry where opportunities outpace growth, especially in cybersecurity. 1/3 of information security jobs require a cybersecurity certification. To maintain your competitive edge across audit, IT, and cybersecurity readiness, visit go.acilearning.com/twit. That's go.acilearning.com/twit. Don't forget to use our special code TWIT30 to get 30% off a standard or premium individual IT Pro membership. Okay, so Ilan, how has the constituency changed? I mean, you started out with lug people who are pioneers. They're all helping each other. Linux is a hermit crab on Windows laptops and servers and so forth. And actually, the cloud hasn't happened yet because somebody at IBM didn't discover you could put many Linux instances on a 370 or a Z80 or whatever. And now that's gigantic. We have containers. Everything is industrialized, and it's a much more industrial field. So how has the constituency changed, the people who are coming to the show?
So I think initially a lot of us were students. The event was happening on a university campus. It was being organized by university students as well as lug members from around the area. And so I think a lot of the companies that came out to SCaLE probably saw it, I would guess saw it as a recruiting pipeline at the time. All those students, however, grew up and got jobs, and they're still interested in open source. They're still interested in open platforms and in all these technologies. And so now they've come back. A lot of them still come back every year, but now they're looking at it from not from I want a job perspective or I want to learn how to get my career going. Although we still offer a lot of that, a lot of programs around that. Now it's folks that are using Linux and open source software every day as part of their jobs. It's folks that want to that are core developers on some of these projects that come in to meet with their communities, and that's I think just as the community has grown, we have grown up, and so in terms of topics, I think also now we cover a lot that's higher level above. It's not just about Linux the operating system, but about things that you can do with Linux or software that you build on top of Linux, or how to use it in various commercial and non-commercial ways. It's not just about the operating system itself, but rather about things that you do with it, which is, it turns out that 20 years later, we're not all looking to tinker with our graphics cards anymore. We actually want to play the video game finally, or we want to write the software on top that uses that GPU for something finally. And it's just, the platform now can do it. We've gotten through all of the hurdles that made it hard to use Linux back in the day. And so now we can talk about getting work done. So, and as far as this, the speakers, I mean, this year we've got folks like Ken Thompson from who created Unix and Go and UTF-8 and a whole bunch of other things we depend on, giving a keynote. We have Arun Gupta from Intel, who's going to talk about some of his experience and work in building open source communities. We have another one that I don't want to scoop the PR team. We'll announce it next week, but it's sort of from the maker world. And so this is, these are, I would say, the other thing that's changed for us is just we can now, 20 years ago, we said if we invite all of our open source heroes and legends out, they'll have to come because we have a conference, and some of them did. But now usually we reach out to somebody and we say, hey, would you come give a talk at SCaLE? And the answer is yes. So that part's gotten a lot easier because people know who we are and what we do.
Very cool. As an Intellian, I have to also, I guess, mention plug that Arun will be on FLOSS Weekly coming up too. I hope maybe we'll tease his keynote a little.
Keynote, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So it's just that's how it's changed in terms of I mentioned earlier that we've got it used to be people looking to launch their career. In order to keep that going, one of the things that we've done regularly and we're bringing back this year is sort of two tracks. One's Open Source Career Day, which is an opportunity for people that want to get their break in using getting jobs around Linux and open source software. It's a whole day about helping you prep your resume and how to do interviews and sort of how to pitch yourself well and opportunities there. And then for the other end of the spectrum, we have a whole track for kids called SCaLE Next Generation. And what that is kids, students that are in middle school, high school, sometimes even younger, will come in and give presentations about interesting things they're doing with Linux and open source software. And I'm always amazed at what these folks are pulling off. Like I got my start in Linux, I don't know, started using Linux when I was, before I could drive. And was definitely not at the level that some of these kids are when they come up and present. And so we've been doing that for, I don't know, probably about 10 years now. And it's interesting. I've seen some of the kids that started off giving talks in that track move into their career, go off to college, do amazing things. And so it's great to follow their trajectory there. But you can get started at any age with Linux and open source. And so we hope, if you are coming out to the show, there are conferences that say you must be 18 or older to come in the door. That's okay. We're like, bring the 18 and younger as well. Our sponsors love it. There's content just for them. The SCaLE, most conferences have a party or a reception on one of their nights with, that ends up being a cocktail hour. We do a game night. So kids come out and play laser tag with their parents or board games or, card games or whatever it might be. It's a ton of fun. So we've made sure to keep SCaLE family friendly. One, because we wanted to give the next generation an opportunity to get started early with open source and Linux, but two, because a lot of the organizers have kids now. And if they're going to go away from their family for a weekend to run a conference, they want to bring their kids with them. So it's a little self-serving, but yeah.
The kid thing is interesting. I remember, the last time I was there on the expo floor, tons of kids running around, but in the good way, not in the bad way. I had actually, some really engaging conversations with very young people, and it's really impressive.
Yep.
I would definitely encourage people with kids to take them to SCaLE.
We've had school districts like the LA Unified School District, Pasadena Unified School District have come to us and said, can we send a bus of kids to the show to come just learn about this stuff? I'm like, sure, bring them on by. The more the merrier. So, if you've got a student group or a club or something and you want to bring them by to learn about Linux and open source software or please reach out. We're happy to help set that up.
Yeah, it works out really well. I don't think it would be suitable at, a lot of other open source events. Some, yes. I mean, there are actually, I'm seeing more and more sort of kid-friendly and family-friendly tracks at various events. But that actually kind of brings me to a question that I had in my mind. A lot of open source events now are very corporate and business-oriented. That's kind of taken over the events world, whereas the community kind of grassroots events have, in some cases, kind of died off. Their attendance has dropped, but SCaLE's going strong. I wonder, I do understand that SCaLE is definitely respectful of the business interests. I just wonder, what's your secret? Do you have a secret? Is there some magic formula that has helped you weather this?
I think there's sort of a spectrum, and you can be all the way on one side, which is entirely focused on the free software, non-commercial aspects of it, which those are all great topics and things that we're interested in, love. And then you could go all the way to the other end, which is just we're not here to talk about anything open source. We're here to talk about commercialization of that software or of services on top of it. And we've tried really hard to just live in the middle because those two communities depend on each other. Most open source developers have jobs somewhere, and those jobs are funding their work. And so those companies, they understand that those companies need to exist, need to meet things. A lot of users want commercial support or services or something around open source software that they use. And those companies recognize that they're building on top of the shoulders of giants with taking advantage of all these open source, projects and communities. So it should be symbiotic. And if we can strike the right balance, it keeps both groups excited and coming back. And I'm sure on any given year we lean too much one way or the other. But we've tried really hard to keep that balance. And so I don't know, on the expo floor, right next to the Red Hat booth, you'll see a Linux user group that has their community booth or or an open source project run by just one or two maintainers. And we try not to separate them out too much. We try to keep that together, and it gives it a fun energy that everybody seems to enjoy. So yeah. And so we've done that. We followed that model at Texas Linux Fest and a few other places, and it seems to work well. And hopefully those other events will come back now that the pandemic's subsided a bit. So.
Yeah, there's so many topics we can go to here. One of them that's on my list here, there's is the I remember, I mean, at Linux Journal, an irony of Linux Journal was that it was run entirely by women, including Katherine, and the constituency on the readership side was almost 100% male. And I'm wondering if that's changed much, and if you see that at SCaLE. Do you see more women there? And for that matter, do you see more diversity in general? And is the field, such as it is now, being much more sort of industrial and big and successful, doing better at attracting women and others to the field?
We've put in a lot of effort in making sure that we're a welcoming conference to everybody, regardless of gender, race, other backgrounds. I think even for us, it's still sometimes a struggle to find, to ensure that things are as diverse as we would like them to be. Turns out, I remember one year we organized a panel with the CEOs of a bunch of several open source companies, and it turns out I would love for there to be a woman CEO of one of those companies, but there wasn't one. So I didn't have I couldn't create a diverse panel in that regard when I wanted to. So sometimes it's still a challenge because there's, it's just where we are as an industry. But it's all of our responsibility to just make that easier and to be more approachable and to go out of our way to create those opportunities. And I think we've done that at SCaLE. We publish stats most years on our experiences there. I think the report from this year will come out after the event. But if you see us doing something where we could be doing better, call us out on it. We're happy to take constructive feedback.
Are you streaming the event again? I just wondered, as an aside, for people who are listening, I obviously I recommend traveling and attending in person, but if you can, but
we've built an interesting stack of open source software that we use for streaming and recording the event, and you should be able to find most of the sessions on YouTube. That being said, I think the biggest part of SCaLE that people that is not what's on the schedule. It's what happens between the sessions. It's what happens in the halls. It's happening in the discussion sessions, the groups, all of these other pieces. And I wish, I encourage people to come out and take advantage of that in person, because I can't live stream the hallway track. There's 2,000 sessions happening at any given time in the hallway track. But in the I can serve the talks that are in rooms. Also, just the conversations you'll have on the expo floor and in other places as you meet with every Linux distro that exists, that is having maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but has a booth at the expo floor. If you're using them, the developers there want to meet with you. You can't do that on a live stream, but we do try to capture all the content because we think it's important and for to offer that education.
And you might get to watch Kyle's soda can explode or something.
Yeah, we always have some adventure. Yeah, Kyle Rankin, who's another ex-Linux Journal person, as Katherine and Doc, he was giving a talk last year, and suddenly everybody heard an explosion in the room, and they thought a bomb went off or a gun got shot. No, it was just some attendee forgot a Coke can behind a projector, and it just got over the course of the day, just got really hot and it exploded. So.
I happened to be watching on the live stream at the time, actually, from my living room, and I was like, "What happened to Kyle?" It was pretty funny.
But it's there's always some adventure in event planning, and that was one of the ones last year. So.
It was very dramatic, actually, in the video, because I didn't know what it was, and everybody in the room is freaking out. It was pretty wild. Anyway, I think Doc has a question.
Oh no, just every event does have weird things that go on that you don't expect. I love this story about was the Grammys next door? You said that? That's great. Or that they scheduled a pandemic exactly to correspond with the time that your thing is. I don't know exactly what day scale was that year, but I know New York was kind of a hot spot for COVID, and my wife and I were like on the last flight out of Newark that before United started canceling them. I mean, just because nobody's, everybody got on a plane and got somewhere else, and then there was nothing. And Newark Airport was like, there's nobody here except on the planes. You went through security in 2 minutes, and then all the halls were crowded, all the planes are crowded. It was crazy. Yeah. So we actually have a back channel ask. Actually, Ant is asking it too. What is your stack for doing streaming? because we care about that, and our stack is not always orthodox or in open source sense.
Yeah, it's so we have the cameras themselves are honestly they're repurposed security cameras, but it turns out you can get really high quality video out of them. We have we should write an article about this somewhere if I can convince Michael and the team to do it. But it's a lot of we use FFmpeg and a bunch of automation around that to do the video to do the slicing and dicing of videos. We use OBS in some areas. I'll be honest, if the team comes back and listens to how I describe this, they will tell me I got it wrong. So what I'd rather do is write a blog post about it and share it out. And so let me work on that. But in the end, it all ends up on YouTube, which in itself isn't necessarily open source, but I think that's okay. We do the best we can in terms of getting it up to that final output using open technologies. So, and that's actually one of the challenges we've had over the years as we're running an event is that some of the pragmatism of sometimes there's a choice. Do we use something do we only use open source software in planning the event, or are there places where we should accept services or proprietary software where we need to? And we've tried to be pragmatic about it. There was years when we outsourced our mobile app to a third party that did it all, and it wasn't open source. And then there's been years more recently where a bunch of college kids in Pasadena said, we want to build the mobile app for you. We'll do it as open source software. It's up on GitHub now. So we just have to, we try to use we use open wherever we can, and that's our preference. But sometimes sometimes we have to pick other things.
Yeah, it's always crazy how you have to, there's, well, I was thinking of what Brian Bellendorf said that we need minimum viable centralization. And so in a similar way, I think you need minimum viable openness. It's just like, you've got your thumb on that scale all the time to make sure that you maximize that. But as a practical consideration, you kind of reach a point. So you say, how many simultaneous sessions do you have going on? Something
like about a dozen or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's the hallway thing. What's the hallway story?
That's just my that's what we call the hallway track. Just all the conversations that happen in the margins between the talks and in the hallway. Right. It's not actually sessions that are on the schedule or anything. It's just when you get 3,000-4,000 people in a room together, they start talking about things that are interesting to them, and that's some of the funnest part that's the funnest part of SCaLE for me, is those conversations. And I hear that from attendees all the time, is that piece in the middle is how you found your next job, how you learned about some new technology that's not has not made it to prime time yet, so maybe it's not on the schedule just yet, but you're learning about it in the hallway, and that's I encourage people to participate in those conversations wherever they can. And the SCaLE community is very friendly and very approachable. It's just like, you don't need to know the person to tap on their shoulder and say, that sounds interesting, can I join in? And so that's the best part of conferences in general, but at SCaLE specifically.
Well, we'll get to some questions in Katherine's queue and mine, but first I have to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Fastmail. Free email isn't free, and you pay with your privacy. For over 20 years, Fastmail has been a leader in email privacy. At Fastmail, your data stays yours with better productivity features for as little as $3 a month. Fastmail prioritizes your privacy. Your personal data is kept safe and away from third parties with better spam filters and absolutely no ads. All Fastmail data is stored in the U.S., and Fastmail is fully GDPR compliant. Masked email protects your personal data by allowing you to create multiple addresses to use when you sign up for various websites. And privacy isn't all you get with Fastmail. Customize your workflow with colors, custom swipes, night mode, and more. Organize your inbox with scheduled send, snooze, folders, labels, search bar, etc. Plus, keep track of all the important details in your life easily with Fastmail's powerful sidebar. Gives you the ability to send and receive emails from your own domain and manage multiple email addresses in one space, which helps keep you organized and protects your personal data. Works with password managers like Bitwarden and 1Password to make it easy for you to create unique passwords for every account and safely store them on your device. It's great on desktop and mobile, especially when you download the FastMail app to get the most out of your email. The FastMail app is the best place to try all their newest features and will always be the most up-to-date. FastMail has a US-based support team full of email experts that are always within reach to put you first. The FastMail team believes in working for customers as people to be cared for, not products to be exploited. Advertisers are left out, putting you and your privacy at the center. Check out these reviews. I use FastMail because it's super fast and cares deeply about privacy and doing the right thing. FastMail rocks. It's secure, private, independent, and has a Gmail transfer tool. You won't regret this move. I test several services but settled on FastMail years ago and couldn't be happier. I use it for my entire family as well as a separate plan for my business. And don't worry about losing information. It's easy to download your old data and import it into your new FastMail inbox. No need to leave important info behind when you switch. FastMail is moving email forward with new internet standards and open source innovations that power many email services other than their own. Don't get left behind by substandard email providers. New year, new you, new email. Reclaim your privacy, boost productivity, and make email yours with FastMail. Try it free for 30 days at fastmail.com/twit. That's fastmail.com/twit. FastMail is also giving Twit listeners a 15% discount on the first year when you sign up today. Okay, so Katherine, you got one there?
Yeah, I do. So the SCaLE attendees offer kind of an interesting little sample group of open sorcerers, right, with a variety of interests and experience levels and all of that. But that I would think that offers you a unique insight into what's interesting. What are people interested? What are people talking about? You know, which sessions are people attending? And I wondered if you could tell us, like, what is the most popular subject matter at SCaLE these days? What do you expect? Next month to be the highly attended session.
So it's interesting. We can definitely watch the trends in the open source community over the years as new technologies come in and take over. So I remember early in SCaLE, there was we had 1 year we had one talk about Asterisk and VoIP using open source software come in. And the next year I could have run an entire 4-day conference with just the proposals on Asterisk and open source VoIP because that's what was hot that year. These days, the last 2 years, the containers and cloud native Kubernetes type tracks have been the most popular. I expect that'll still be the case this year. It's just what everybody's hot and bothered about in the open source world right now is how to run this infrastructure at scale. No pun intended. And so that seems to be the very popular, some of the more popular stuff. For me, I'm really interested in our we've had this will be the third year we're running this open source and government track. And we keep getting in, we get people in from local government agencies talking about how they're using open source software. Last year, the LA County came in and talked about an open source platform that they were developing for running elections for the LA County area. And so that's interesting to me. I don't know that it's going to be the most packed room at the conference, but it's interesting to see how open source is entering into new and different industries that we've not seen it in the past. And so those will become I hope someday those become the big tracks of the future, right? Containers didn't start as the most popular track. It grew into that. The security also tends to be a very popular track. Lots of interesting topics there. So
I'm looking forward to the security talks in particular, and you get phenomenal speakers, I must say.
Yeah. So yeah, it's and then like I said, the keynotes this year, those are one of my favorite parts about working on SCaLE over the last 20 years is I just get to meet people that built the platforms my career has depended on. Like if Unix hadn't existed, Linux wouldn't have existed later, and I wouldn't have gotten to be, where I am in my career today without all of that. So, so Ken Thompson's work is foundational there. Last year we had Vint Cerf. So it's like standing on stage next to the guy that literally invented the internet. Was a little humbling, but was a great honor. So it's a lot of fun. I did want to put out there, we've been talking about, I keep hearing all these promo codes for your sponsors. So I want to throw one out there for the TWiT listeners as well, which is, if you use the promo code TWiT, TWiT, you'll get 50% off your SCaLE registration. And so, we hope to see you there.
Cool. Which is already not very expensive. It's already like, what is it? $75 or something?
Yeah. It's, we've tried really hard over the years to keep the conference price very low. But we also want to make sure that it's approachable to everybody, and so that we're happy to offer discounts to your listeners. So it's $85 at the moment for your ticket full price, and then that'll drop it down to, I don't know, $42.50 or something like that if I'm doing the math right. So yeah.
Amazing deal, actually, considering. Oh my God!
Yeah, I mean,
when you think of what conferences cost, I mean, thousands of dollars in many cases.
Yeah, yep. And so those commercial conferences have for similar content for the same number of days would be probably $3,000, $4,000 a ticket. Yeah. And what we do is we would just work with our sponsors to make sure that those costs are covered by them and not by the attendees. So.
Yeah. What we do with IW is a similar thing. It's not as cheap as yours, but it's lower than most, and we just have the sponsors pay for food, and the projectors are brought to you by so and so. Something else is brought to you by so and so.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't it doesn't look at least as much like they're buying the show, for their own purposes. Just like you get to thank them for a specific thing. It's pretty cool. I mean, often we tend to think, and maybe this is a good segue, that we tend to think, I mean, one of the biggest complaints about, or suspicions about Linux, about open source in general, is that the big co's are taking over. We often talk here about the Linux Foundation, which is basically an industrial.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a corporate thing. It's for companies. It's not for you and me so much. It's for the companies. But it makes them behave well, and I mean, it's a kind of a space where they are the United Nations. They're not bringing their arms into the place. They're working on common problems, and I'm wondering if there's, what do you see as the changing role of the big guys? Microsoft's in there now. I think they're the biggest supporter of the Linux Foundation, but I mean, in the early on, it was IBM. IBM is on top of this thing, but the case with IBM, and I was there and talked to them about it, is that basically they got taken over by their own engineers. It was kind of a coup inside, and say, wait a minute, everything's, we have Samba running on all these old Windows machines, and faking being Windows. And so they just basically went in compliance with their engineers. I don't think that's so much the case now. It's like they all have their own clouds and stuff. So what do you see as the role of the bigs now?
So, I mean, I think it's hard for me to be sympathetic to the grumbling of like, oh, it's all big companies now, because that's what we wanted, right? Like,
we won.
I mean, maybe we didn't want big companies to run it all, but we wanted to be able to run Linux at work. Well, it turns out most companies now, you can probably run Linux on your desktop at work. We wanted to use open source software in our projects. Turns out, if I would bet you 90 some odd percent of software running in the cloud for backing SaaS companies or whatever is, it's Ubuntu or RHEL or some other Linux distro running, an open source database, Cassandra or MongoDB or MySQL or Postgres or something like that. We've won that war. That open is now the default. And so it's hard for me to be unhappy about commercial interests being involved. I think the important part is what you mentioned, which is we have to keep each other and the companies that we're working with and the companies that are supporting our projects honest, that it's not the open source piece isn't for show. It's there for it's usable and it's there to get work done. I do wonder, as things become more and more services, we want to make sure that there's also opportunities for people to continue to build on this software that powers that. And I think that's the challenge for the next. I don't know what the right answer for that is. I think that's the challenge that we're all working on. The other one, open source initiative has been spending a ton of time thinking about how open source and free software play in the world of AI right now. Like is the is the model what's interesting if you don't have the data set that trained the model, or the software behind it? These are all questions that we have to struggle with as the nature of software changes. But it's hard for me to get angry at big companies for wanting to support all the software that we were begging them to support throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And they were saying, at the time, they're like, no, that's a toy. Now they're like, it's not a toy anymore. We run our businesses on it. So, it's just, I think this is a good thing in the end.
I love your answer. I think there is a misperception that open source is for hobbyists. It's this thing we do in our spare time, which is very much not true anymore.
And there are people that still work on,
we still
on
do, but it's not
and
the majority.
And that's great. But I don't know, like back in the early PC days, right? Was it the homebrew computing clubs that people would get together and show off these things that they built at home as hobbyists? And then are we now unhappy that there's a Dell or a Mac or an Intel based laptop, laptop sitting on your desktop at home and you don't have to run build all those things from scratch yourselves? No, we're thrilled by it. We still have the option to build these things ourselves, but we choose to buy products that make it easier. And I think the same is true in the software world. And we just have to figure out how to continue to maintain that balance. So.
Yeah, the history of the internet and many other things trace back to the Model Railroad Club at MIT in a building everybody was ignoring. What you said about big companies too reminds me, I think it's an outstanding point, by the way, that, hey, wait a minute, we wanted this. I used to have this business partner who was very argumentative and very hard to argue with. He was like an attorney, though that wasn't his profession. But he did this strange thing, which is when you won the argument, suddenly he was on your side. It's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be over there. I didn't get the satisfaction of having won this argument. It's sort of like, no, now he's arguing your points. And it's sort of what happened with these big guys. Look at Microsoft. And we're waiting for Microsoft to get killed. Instead, no, wait a minute, all of Bing is running on Linux. We're using it all over the place.
And this is a place where we had John Gossman out as a keynote speaker several years back before he had retired from Microsoft. And he came out and, that was the question everybody got. Like he was getting from the audience was like, why open source? Why do you care about Linux now? And his answer at the time, I thought made sense, which was, Microsoft didn't see themselves as a software product company. They saw themselves as a developer tools company. And if developers wanted to build their stuff on Linux and open source software, that's where they needed to be. And that was his take on the transition. And I'm sure there's pockets of Microsoft that are still not huge Linux fans or open source fans, but by and large, everybody I run into there, Linux powers Azure. Linux runs on top of Azure. Like they're putting out distros, they're putting out open source projects. They run GitHub for at the end of the day. Like it's they've become they've chosen to become part of the community rather than fight it. And I think that's.
Yeah, I was thinking of and we also had some major open source figures going to work there, like Miguel Diacaza, who basically single-handedly say, I like Mono, I like C#, whatever else he liked, and just started making all these connections between open source projects and Microsoft. Ends up with a job there. He was on the show recently. I advise people to go back and listen to that too. It was really good. Nat Friedman went in and ran GitHub. I mean, there's a lot of that.
I think it's important to remember companies aren't, you say Microsoft bad or, I don't know, whoever the company du jour, like of the day is to make fun of or to complain about. You say they're bad, but it's, the reality is most of these organizations don't have one persona or one front to the world. They're thousands of people. And so different pockets have different agendas and different things that they're trying to accomplish. And sometimes they'll make a misstep, with their left foot, but with their right foot, they're moving in the right direction towards, to supporting our communities or supporting our projects. And so, as people come and go, positions change, and that's companies are people. And that's right. Like they're made of people. And that's an important part to remember. You can't say, big co-evil, and then look at their and then go hang out and drink beer with their open source team, right? Like turns out they're not all, not everybody has the same position at an organization. And that's also true of the companies that we consider our closest allies in the open source world. There's teams there that sometimes they make missteps, and we just have to remember that these are all long-term conversations and engagements, and we have to work with them to reach the goals that we want, not immediately jump down their throats when they make the announcement you don't like.
So we're close to the end of the show here, and this is a point where we often ask what have we not asked that we should have asked. But if you don't have an answer to that one, I do have a question. So it's one or the other.
Okay, happy to take your question. And
okay, it's a simple one actually. It's one sort of back channel one. What issues do you think are never going away? I mean, licensing, personal independence. I'm just wondering, because one of the things of running a conference is you think, well, there's some that go away, like there's what's a CD world, or a DVD world, right? Well, it's gone, right? But there are some perma issues. I'm wondering if there are any that you see never going away.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think privacy and independence are two topics that will always be, they'll always be near and dear to the open source community's heart, even as, and a lot of the commercial engagement that we have these days maybe makes that some of that even more challenging and more relevant right now. I think at the heart of a lot of what we've done with open source over the last, I don't know, what is it, 20, 30, I mean, SCaLE's been around for 20, so maybe it's 30, 40 years. I don't know. I don't like doing that math when I realize how long it's been since I was at UC.
Let's not talk about it.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of that stems from, I wanted to do X and I couldn't do it, and now so I built an open source project to do it, right? Like, why did Linus build Linux, right? He didn't have access to the Unix systems he wanted at the university. Why did Stallman get excited about free software at the time? Well, he wanted a print drive. He wanted to make a change up print driver or something, I think is the story. So like a lot of this comes down to, I wanted to accomplish a thing and I wanted to do it independently, and now I can. And then it just turns out that people get excited about how you solve that problem and want to solve it with you. And privacy, I think, just is an increasingly important topic, just because how we each define it seems to be a little bit different. How every country seems to enforce it seems to be a little bit different. And so I think it might not be an evergreen issue, but I think that's an issue for the next decade at least. So we're gonna keep seeing that. Yeah, those are two topics that I think we'll never get away from.
Those are awesome. So great, to close the show, we always ask these two questions. What are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
I tend to do most of my stuff in VI and Python are the two that I spend most of my time with. A little bit of Bash and Shell, but overall that. But as we're closing, I just want to remind folks, SCaLE, March 9th through the 12th at the Pasadena Convention Center. We'd love to have you come out and learn about open source and Linux and free software with us. We've got lots of events around this: Kubernetes Community Day, Ceph Days, Postgres events, MySQL events, whatever topic you're interested in. I promise you there's a track for you. And then don't forget that promo code TWiT, TWiT, for 50% off. Sorry, I got to do my ad pitch, Doc.
No, that's awesome.
Excellent. That's awesome. We want the pitches. The pitches are great.
And come say hi to me too, please.
Yeah, this is so great. So Ilan, this has been an awesome show. It's been great. We'll have to have you back and talk about
anytime
all this stuff again. This has been one of the best shows ever. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to actually meeting you in person someday.
Yeah, me too. I'll actually get to SCaLE one of these years.
Sounds great.
Thanks again, man.
Thanks, Doc. Thanks, Katherine.
Thank you. This is great. I'm excited.
So Katherine, that was good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was so good. I've been looking forward to today for a while, actually.
I know. It's and I've wanted to do this show for a while, and I really do regret never getting there.
You gotta go. I haven't been very, very many times either. So that's, it's a thing that happens, but you should go for sure.
Yeah, there's this one, the Toronto one, and it's almost always been geography. It's interesting because I was just in Southern California, and which I love. I mean, I love living there. I mean, I love that there is snow on the mountains there right now. I mean, there are Alps. overlooking Los Angeles. We don't get that in Indiana. But anyway, yeah. So this is great.
Yeah, it was great.
So what are your plugs? Where we go?
Yeah, let's see. Any day now, I should have a very interesting thing to announce on open.intel.com. And then there's that other podcast we do where we have fun talking about things like Ilan just mentioned, privacy and other issues. So yeah, I don't know. Find me around the internet and say hi. That's all I have to plug.
That's great. And
I do regret not being able to reminisce about the first SCaLE I went to that was SCaLE 8X. There was a women in open source track that was separate. Kind of glad it's no longer separate, but it's such an interesting evolution, I think, of the whole show to see it from then to now. And anyway, it's always been kind of my favorite event. I'm glad we got to talk about it today.
And this is the point
Second
where
to DrupalCon.
I hurry up and look ahead at next week to plug next week, and we have Lubos Kalkman and Douglas DeMaio, and I don't have further notes on that, and I should. They're always good. Anyway, that is next week, and we'll see you then. Take it easy, everybody. See you next week.
You want to hear about the latest news happening in the tech world from the people who write the articles, sometimes from the people who are actually making the news? Well, we got a show for you here at TWiT.tv. It's called Tech News Weekly. Me, Jason Howell, and my co-host Micah Sargent, we talk with some amazing people each and every Thursday on Tech News Weekly, and we share a little bit of our own insights in each of us bringing a story of the week. That's at TWiT.tv/TNW. Subscribe right now.